Jerusalem, a city where you can look out and think. Along this way walked King David and Solomon and Jeremiah, Jesus and Mohammed, prophets and pilgrims, poets and warriors, and tourists like me. Just a dentist from Green Bay, Wisconsin, off on a winter holiday in Israel. The standard tour from Tel Aviv to the Sea of Galilee, down to the frontier of the Negev, and back for our last few days here at the King David Hotel. As for the character sitting across from me, he's a native of the city. His name is Uri, age 13, Jerusalem born and bred. In the last 2 weeks, I've taken in the theater in Tel Aviv, and danced in a fisherman's settlement in the Galilee, stood on the mountain where King Saul battled the Philistines, and swam in the Gulf where King Solomon's navy put out to sea. Spent Hanukkah in Judean hills, and Christmas in Nazareth. And I thought, well, now I've seen Israel. But oh no, not according to my young friend here. I met him this morning up on Mount Zion, the last day of sightseeing according to my schedule. I remember I stood up there taking it all in. The Tomb of David, the traditional room of the Last Supper, the Domitian Abbey, and down below the new city, Israel's capital, with its buildings of glittering golden stone carved from these Judean hills. I guess you've figured out by now, I can't see a sunset, a curious old building, or a striking face without wanting to capture it with a camera. I keep thinking, all too soon I'll be back home again, and all this will seem a million miles away, and I'll need to prove to myself I was really here. And that was how I got to know Uri, a Jerusalem schoolboy out on winter holiday, and not knowing quite what to do with himself. It turned out his father was our guide, and that was what brought him trailing along after us across Mount Zion. Now that I look back, I think it must have been pure fate, my running into him. Some people have a way of always getting lost or tripping downstairs or getting mixed up in traffic accidents. My particular problem happens to be I'm always falling into the hands of experts. I don't know, maybe it's something about my face. I happen across an innocent-looking little boy, and in 2 minutes he's giving me advice. Right away, he's an expert. I guess it was about an hour later, I began to get the strange sensation I was being followed. It was Uri, trailing along after me like a shadow. There was nothing to do but resign myself to the fact that I'd been adopted. I had an official assistant, camera carrier, and personal guide. As far as Uri was concerned, I hadn't even begun to see Israel. He kept insisting that there was a whole other world here, tucked away off the beaten track. The best was yet to come. I took him back to the King David Hotel for tea, and he made me an offer. He'd act as my guide to show me some of the things I'd missed. The more he talked about it, the more the idea began to intrigue me. We started out the next day just as I might have expected. He simply decided how he'd like to spend the morning and dragged me along to Jerusalem's Zoo, a place with every tree and animal, every bush and bird mentioned in the Book of Books. The parrot and the eagle, the raven and the pelican, and Uri's favorite, rarest of them all, the Syrian bears. Only 9 in captivity, and 6 are here in Jerusalem's biblical zoo. Animals out of the pages of Isaiah and the Song of Solomon. Young Uri knew the Bible like the palm of his hand, and he quoted me chapter and verse as we strolled through the only zoo in the world where the cages have quotations from the Book of Kings and the monkeys eat matzahs for breakfast. In the morning, we headed back towards the Jaffa Road with its Russian Orthodox Church, and then on to where the great arches of the Abyssinian Church loom over the Street of the Prophets. Through the dim gateway and into the maze of ancient alleys they call Mea Sha'arim. It was as though time, in a death-defying leap, had flung back 100 years. We moved among children wearing the long curling earlocks of the most pious, among bearded patriarchs wearing velvet hats and coats of silk. And then on into the souk, the Oriental Bazaar, teeming with newcomers from every corner of the earth. Coffee sellers from Istanbul and cart drivers from Persia, coppersmiths and fish peddlers, much too busy to pose for a picture. In the afternoon, we took a cheroot, a taxi ride for the fare of a bus, out into the Judean hills, toward the ancient village of Ein Kerem. The sun was warm on the olive groves. It was hard to believe that this was January. January in the gentle place where John the Baptist was born. We wandered along the crumbling ancient walls, passing Russian Orthodox monks looking like figures from another century. And then Uri hailed us a couple of local taxis, and we made our way up the hillside toward the Church of the Visitation. Through the Baroque iron gates into the courtyard with its delicate mosaic frescoes. I made up my mind to take Uri on up to Tel Aviv. I got his parents' permission, and we headed west to the shore of the Mediterranean. I'd been in Tel Aviv on my tour before, but somehow it was different, seeing it through a child's eyes. There were all sorts of things a grown-up would never stop to notice. Tel Aviv is a 20th century city, but travel just a few steps south along the coast and you're in ancient Jaffa. 3,000 years ago, it was one of the world's greatest seaports. The ships of Tyre put in here, bringing the cedars of Lebanon for Solomon's temple. And it's here, under the minaret of a white mosque, that you come upon the site of the house of Simon the Tanner, where the Apostle Peter first dreamed of spreading the teachings of Jesus throughout the world. It was here, they say, that Jonah started out on the voyage that landed him in the belly of the whale. And here that Richard the Lionhearted came in a ship with crimson sails and stormed ashore, where now stands this sleepy fishing village, a stone's throw from the modern lights of Tel Aviv. Out in the countryside, we climbed the path near Rosh Ayan, up to the ruins of Herod's the Greatest ancient fortress of Antipatris, the broken walls of the dungeon where the Apostle Paul once spent the night in the hands of the Roman police. The River Yarkon. There aren't many times when I've known complete and utter peace, but that morning was one of them. I just wandered where life led me, and somehow I found again the lost art of discovery. I had Uri to thank for that, and Uri to thank for taking me to Caesarea, to this city that boasted palaces and public baths, and a pool of green tile built especially for Cleopatra. He was just a 13-year-old, like any 13-year-old, a bit of a show-off, a bit of a clown, a bit of a poet. Except that being Israeli, he had a passion for the past. Not so strange for a boy in a country where the kings of Zion and the emperors of Rome are not just dead names in a history book, but living men who once marched through the next town, the neighboring field, right past those stones. It was Uri who led me through this lovely shell of a city that was once the glory of Rome. It was here that, in the First Crusade, the famed Knights of the Round Table landed to find at last the Holy Grail, the fragile emerald cup that was the chalice at the Last Supper. Uri had made a promise to take me off the beaten track, and that led us to Ein Hod, a colony of artists set down on a breathtaking hillside between Mount Carmel and the Mediterranean. All through the courtyards and the cool gardens, there were scattered works of art of every imaginable style, from modern sculpture to the mosaic technique that was known in this land 1,000 years before Michelangelo. A tiny village whose population produces lithographs and woodcuts, murals and stage designs, and enough paintings for 12 shows a year in its own gallery. And then Uri sprang his little surprise. His uncle, an artist living here in Ein Hod. It was the place for an artist, all right. There was something about it. Something that made you want to paint, to put it all down. The slopes of pine and pomegranate, and the vineyards, the blue of the Mediterranean stretching away in the winter sunlight. It was almost noon by the time we started out into the foothills of Carmel, the mountainside where once the prophet Elijah thundered against the priest of Baal. And on a winding road, perched like a wild eagle's nest high above the sea, we came upon the Druze village of Dalyat el-Carmel, a village of shepherds and proud horsemen who claimed to be descended from Jethro, father-in-law of Moses. Like many Israelis, Uri can rattle away in 3 languages, Hebrew, English, and Arabic. At the local cafe, the Arabic came in handy for ordering us a lunch of the flat oriental bread they call pita, and the delicious dish of spiced